Okay, let me get that note out of the way so I can finish with the introduction. So she focuses on special initiatives for the Deep Decarbonization Pathways Project and America's Zero Carbon Action Plan. Elena serves as the Central Sustainable Development Solutions Network lead for their annual Zero Emission Solution Conference, and which is launched at COP22 in Morocco. She also coordinates the European Green Deal Senior Working Group, and part of her core portfolio is to help bring low emission technologies, policies, and solutions to decision makers across networks and sectors to help implement the Paris Agreement. That is sort of a resume sounding overview. What you also need to know is that she's a remarkable human being with a lot of expertise in a lot of areas, and we're very honored to have you here this morning. So Elena, if you could mention your other colleagues who I suspect are on board. I can see them here now. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Medard, for that wonderful introduction. Yeah, so you'll recall, actually, I joined you guys last year as well. We talked about the Zero Carbon Action Plan, and I know this is a new cohort, so I'm going to actually go over that a little bit. But really excitingly, I'm joined by two of my colleagues, Murtaza Baxamusa and Elise Hanson, who are both from the county of San Diego, to share some additional work that's kind of been born out of that Zero Carbon Action Plan. And to give you some really a concrete example of this work on the ground locally in Southern California. So they'll do more elaborate introductions, I imagine, when I pass over, but I'm going to start by sharing a few slides, if that's okay.
Yes, it is. And let me stop sharing my slides. So I think you can do, and Edmund, the person who normally handles all this is traveling, I believe, to Saudi Arabia right at this moment. So Edmund, you need to make sure Elena is either able to share her slides or is a co-host, whatever it's needed to make it work for her.
I think I got
great.
it.
Perfect.
Great. And Edmund, I think Elise will be sharing afterwards as well, if you want to just be ready for that. And I also just saw you guys' packed agenda for today. This is crazy. Also really exciting. And I actually think that our presentation is going to be a really good precursor to some of the ones that you have later this afternoon. So really excited to be here today. Thank you so much. We're going to share with you an example of a deep decarbonization pathway project and how we've kind of evolved from this national scope to a local scope. So I'll jump right into it. So just a quick note on our agenda here, actually, so I can see you guys. There you go. We'll start just explaining what decarbonization really means in practice and some of the history of our pathways approach that has evolved actually since 2015. And then I'm going to give you an example of a national pathway from the United States, which has led to our San Diego work, and then I'll pass it over to our colleagues. So just a quick background for those of you who may not know what SDSN is. We're a global network of academic institutions, universities, and researchers. So I actually, thank you, Professor, it's saying that I have a lot of expertise. I also mobilize a lot of expertise, which is a really fun part of my job. So the map that you're seeing here on the screen is our global network distribution. We now have more than 44 national and regional networks and more than 1,600 institutional members. And so they are all brought together under this overarching agenda to help implement the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And we do that through a variety of efforts, one being policy analysis and research, which is what the work I'll share with you today fits under. Also just cultivating this global knowledge network and sharing. So we do a lot of events throughout the year, our International Conference on Sustainable Development in September in New York, among others, and also through education. I wanted to point to this resource because many of you might be interested in it, but we have many open source, massive online courses that are available to take for free, and that's through the SDG Academy. So definitely encourage you to check that out there. And so I run specifically our climate and energy program globally. And so that work is specifically targeted at helping to strengthen the technical capacities of our governments, basically because we have this massive network of knowledge producers and researchers. We really try to enable that interconnection of that knowledge with policy development and with governments and be that enabler to connect them. And then also this has evolved into charting strategies for decarbonizing energy systems, realizing the energy sector is so interconnected across so many other sectors and a lot of the ways that we live our lives, and is also a huge historical and current emission source. We've really concentrated a lot of our work in trying to figure out how we can enable the decarbonization of that. And then we also work towards creating these intensive global dialogues. I mentioned that the Zero Emission Solutions Conference that we do alongside COP. That's actually in recent years taken a hybrid format. So there's an opportunity for others to join. And we will be doing that again this year. Since the pandemic, it's really actually opened up the door, I think, for more inclusive participation. So I welcome anybody to get in touch with me if you'd like to learn more about that. And so also just enabling these partnerships for technology solutions. So what I wanted to start with today is just giving a quick background on our historical deep decarbonization pathway project. It's a mouthful, so I may refer to it as the DDPP moving forward here. And so basically in 2015, we published 16 different national reports that were developed by country teams. And what we wanted to do was target the biggest emitters covering more than 70% of global emissions and really produce at the time, which was feasibility exercises. We needed to produce a scientific basis under which we could convince governments that decarbonization was actually technologically feasible and also economically plausible. In 2015 and pre-Paris Agreement, that was still a question mark, right? This was actually back in the day where there were still very small debates on the actual reality of climate change and it being human caused. And so these reports really fed into those discussions that created the Paris Agreement and that really rapid ambition to 2 degrees. And this work has these 6 research approach, which has actually been the underlying basis for a lot of our work now. One, in that it was transformational. So obviously limiting global warming to 2 degrees or less will require a rapid transformation across the way we live, the way we work, the way we travel, the way we use and produce energy. So we really need to talk about a systems approach and a transformational change. Secondarily, we were trying to work towards filling a critical need. So making sure that there was an actual knowledge gap that we were filling so that policymakers who are working on what do we do first? How do we get started on this? What kind of policies do we need in the next 5 years, the next 10 years? And what does that transformation look like? Maybe we can envision a 100% renewable world, but what does that mean next year? And what does that mean 2 years from now, or in line with political cycles? So really trying to align those needs with the science was a big part of this. Third, making sure that the work was country driven. All 16 of those research teams were within their own countries and developed their own models that were designed specifically for their energy systems, their resources, their needs, and their policy environment so that it was all contextualized into their national situation. And also because we enabled this across 16 country teams, it was really a collaborative project where we enabled learning from the different teams to share with each other, share assumptions or generalizations, and even methodologies in developing their models. The work also was solutions oriented, which I think is somewhat obvious, but we really try to take a sector by sector deep dive approach. So what was needed for the energy system and what was needed for the transport system, and understanding that infrastructure and getting very specific, and then how does that all feed into the overall pathway? And then lastly, it's game changing. I think I emphasized this at the start here, but this was really about showing that it was possible. And I'll be honest with you, if you look back at these reports on the web link I have here, most of them were for 80% reduction by 2050, because at the time that was ambitious and that was groundbreaking and showing that that was economically feasible. Many of the reports have now been updated to the net zero by mid-century. So where do we stand now? So actually I would say like this work was a precursor to the very ambitious vanguard that we're in now with net zero commitments. So this graphic was taken from the Climate Watch, the net zero tracker, which is updated regularly. And so what you're seeing here is that we now have more than 83 countries around the world, which represent about 75% of global emissions, who have made net zero commitments. And making net zero commitments is a pretty broad term, and there are obviously a wide variety of what that means in reality. Some countries have actually put them into law, which is indicated by the yellow here. Some have only put it into target policy documents, so like long-term strategies that were published by the governments. That's what you see in blue here. And some have just been political pledges alongside these global climate conferences, which is what you see in orange here. But there's a lot of hope here and a lot of optimism. So I want to just do a little bit of a deep dive with you into our USA work, just as one of the biggest, if not the biggest, historical emitters of greenhouse gases. We like to focus with our SDSN USA network on really helping them to be a forward mover on decarbonization. How can we expect anyone else in the world to work towards this agenda if the US isn't taking responsibility and taking that first step? So our SDSN USA network was created in 2018, and it currently has 175 members across 46 states. And so the network has actually picked up that initial 2015 national report in the United States, and an entire cadre of work has evolved from it. So we've been working on a more of a regional scope, so multi-state scope across the United States to understand, okay, if we have this national pathway, what does it actually mean for the Northeast, or what does it mean for the Midwest, and what does it mean for resource sharing across these and national grid expansion? And also where are we actually going to site these things? So starting to understand what does that spatial planning look like at a national level, which honestly hasn't been done before in any kind of comprehensive way, other than the expansion of our highway system in the 50s. And so all of this work actually culminated into America's Zero Carbon Action Plan. I presented this to the group last year, and I welcome you all to go check it out. It's a really large, pretty heavy integrated report. It's built on the pathways that I was talking about earlier, but it has additional elements to it. We then look more at the financing and spending. How can we actually enable and finance the pathways, so that infrastructure transition? And then what kind of federal policies are needed to enable it? So different subsidy policies, or just emissions standard setting at a national level. And then we did some deep dives into 6 of the major sectors for the United States. And so this work was basically built off of 4 pillars to net zero, or net negative energy systems. So firstly, electricity decarbonization. So how do we make sure that our power sources are coming from net zero sources? Energy efficiency, so basically cleaning up our old and outdated and trying to use smart metering and smart grids to really improve the efficiencies of our systems. Electrification, obviously where possible, switching out fuels for or electricity, or rather molecules for electrons, and then carbon capture. How do we actually, given that some of the industrial processes like cement and steel production don't quite have a solution for decarbonization yet, right now the pathway is showing that we will need some level of carbon capture and sequestration. And so the work basically stated these really high level goals for the next 10 years, and our audience for this report was the federal government. So we wanted to let them know this is basically what you need to prioritize as far as investments and first movers and no regret strategies over the next 10 years. And so I don't think any of this will be too surprising to this group. We're talking about a 3.5 times capacity increase for solar and wind, the elimination of coal generation from our power sources, increasing the storage capacity. So that generally means batteries up to greater than 20 gigawatts, which is obviously huge. And understanding where those batteries are going to come from and how they're built and how they're recycled is obviously a big part of that question as well. And then some general at least minimum requirements for transforming our electric fleets, or sorry, our transport fleets as far as light duty, medium, and heavy duty vehicles. And so these are just meant to be benchmarks that now we have put forward to our federal government that this is what you need to really work towards getting to by 2030. And I'm really excited to say too that the White House published a long-term strategy to net zero in November. And a lot of this work was cited in there as part of their impetus for being ambitious in all of the investments and the benchmarking they're working towards now. And this is my last slide. I will stop talking here and pass it over to my colleagues momentarily. But I wanted to say, a lot of this previous work at the national level, while it's really great for benchmarking, for milestone setting, for giving kind of directional indicators for policy and for financing, it's not specific enough to get really down to, so where are we building this? Where is the next plant going? Where does the grid need to extend to? And there are additional aspects that you just don't get when you're talking about a national context. So things like equity, when you're assessing energy burdens across socioeconomic groups. So if energy is going to get more expensive, how are we going to control those rates and make sure that marginalized households where have a increased energy burden already don't have an increased burden. Employment, our national study did do some macro modeling on which industries are going to grow and which ones are going to decrease, but exactly who were we talking about? Which unions, which sectors, which parts of the country, which states, getting more specific about the actual groups that might impact so that we can be so they can be part of the transition and the conversation. Understanding the health and pollution issues. Air quality issues are not equal across any geography. There are specific neighborhoods that are impacted by them in a higher degree. So we have to understand who are those people, where are those neighborhoods, and making sure that our pathways are including them in our transition. And then I'll just skip down here to geographic or geospatial specificity. So this is also an element that we wanted to, and we had started to include in some of those regional reports that I mentioned, but really understanding where are we going to build these things? Where are we going to, if we need additional capacity, where are we going to site them? And what are the trade-offs for the decisions? And how do we provide that information to our decision makers to do it in a fair, equitable, and just way, which is a really hard challenge, but it's one that we're now ready to take on, I think. So without further ado, I think I will go ahead and pass it over to my colleagues. Murtaza, are you going to kick off here? Sorry, I'll stop sharing.
Yes.
There we go.
Thank you, Elena. So my name is Murtaza Baxamusa, and I'm the program manager for regional sustainability at the County of San Diego. For those of you who are not familiar with San Diego, we are the second largest in population in California, and we're located south of the Los Angeles metropolitan area. We're also a border community, located just north of the border with Mexico and part of the San Diego, Baja California binational region. So on the west side, we have the Pacific Ocean. On the east side, we have the Anza Borrego Desert and the Cleveland National Forest. With that, it gives you a texture of the diversity in our region. We're both culturally and socially diverse, but also ecologically diverse. And that is also positions us unique in terms of how we can take on regional initiative is that we are a self-contained region. We have 18 cities in our region. The unincorporated area for the county serves as its municipal entity, and there's a regional transportation agency, one single water district, and multiple connections in terms of the port, the airport, infrastructure within the region itself. So recognizing the need for a regional approach to addressing climate change, our board decided to take leadership role in the region and create a regional decarbonization framework. That's where we partnered with Elena's team at the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, as well as part of a larger team of researchers led by the University of California, San Diego's Global Policy and Strategies. With that, we were able to draw upon sectoral expertise in transportation, land use, buildings, and electricity. And as I mentioned, in each of these sectors, there's a consistency in terms of how the region operates and the players within them. So it makes sense for us to think about not just what our individual climate action plans do for each municipality, but how do we think of a regional approach that is intersectoral and interjurisdictional. So that's what we mean by when we say regional. So it is local, but nonetheless, it is a regional collaboration. So the study that we did, the technical framework will be completed in July. There's a draft out there right now. It employed an energy systems modeling that Elise is going to talk about to guide sector-specific analysis in the geospatial aspects of electricity infrastructure, potential for natural climate solutions, gaps in transportation sector, and opportunities and challenges in buildings, as well as jobs in terms of how we transition to a clean economy. So this analysis that we did was also the first that looked at different climate action plans in the region by different municipalities. Often there's a gap between what the aspirational, the policy goals are and what they are actually going to accomplish. We quantified that and added it up across all the commitments of agencies in the region to see where the opportunities and gaps lie in terms of where we are, even if we did what our commitments were, and where we need to be. So the framework shows that even if all municipalities in the region met their climate commitments, we would fall far short of our goals in reducing planet heating gases in all the major sectors of the economy. Now, this is just a starting point. The analysis is just a starting point. The future is where, how do we take this information we have and turn it into implementation and action with a collaborative framework. So that is where we are right now. We are reaching out to other agencies, public and private stakeholders, business, labor, community groups, and environmental advocates so that we can form these coalitions of action on climate. So with that, I will turn it over to Elise to present the framework.
Thank you, Murtaza. So planning for decarbonizing the San Diego region has required a multi-pronged approach and has resulted in 3 distinct and interrelated components of what we call the Integrated Regional Decarbonization Framework, or the RDF. The first component is a technical report led by the University of California, San Diego. This report provides technical findings based on energy modeling by some of the nation's leading experts and has provided the baseline assessments of pathways to drastically reduce emissions in key sectors of the economy. Additionally, the report provides a quantitative assessment of changes to employment based on climate investments, as well as a set of policy analyses of the unique political and legal landscape in the San Diego region. The second component is a workforce development study by Inclusive Economics to ensure that our local workers benefit from climate investments. This report provides an assessment of how the region can provide good jobs in a decarbonized economy and help the workforce to transition. Third component is an upcoming report on implementation pathways. While there will be many studies, discussions, and recommendations throughout this process, actual decarbonization results will come from the implementing data-driven policies, programs, and projects. So this is a brief overview of the project's timeline. The process began with energy modeling and subsequent pathways modeling that together compose the technical reports, sector-specific data models, and analyses. The County of San Diego and contractors presented this report to the County Board of Supervisors, took public comments, and had a technical working group provide an extensive review. The report authors then revised the drafts in response to the comments. The review process was repeated with the resulting second draft, and authors are currently working on revising the report and in preparation to submit final versions of the technical and workforce reports. This iterative process is important for numerous reasons. First, it allows for robust public engagement and feedback, so the final products can better reflect the community's needs and goals. Second, it has allowed for jurisdictions to hear about the project and engage with both the county staff and the technical experts. This engagement is critical for building a regional plan that will be interjurisdictional in nature. Third, this process is aided in developing policies and programs for implementation, which is the current phase of this project. In developing policies and programs, the county is working towards implementation pathways that can be developed iteratively and with further public engagement and interjurisdictional collaboration. The RDF technical report process began with identifying the region's highest emitting sectors. The single largest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions in the San Diego region are, in order, on-road transportation of light-duty vehicles, electricity generation, natural gas use in buildings, and on-road transportation of heavy-duty vehicles. Together, these four emissions categories account for 80% of regional emissions. These emissions are measured in carbon dioxide equivalent, which is a way to compare the planet warming effects of different greenhouse gases using a single metric. To address these regional emissions, the technical report modeled pathways to decarbonization for electricity, transportation, and buildings. Additionally, the report analyzed natural climate solutions and land use considerations for regional decarbonization to help understand how natural systems can absorb excess carbon dioxide and how land use decisions can impact their ability to act as carbon dioxide sinks. Some of the key takeaways for each of the sectors in the technical report are as follows. First, the transportation analysis shows that decarbonization will require reducing the emissions from individual vehicles, for example, through electrification, while also reducing the number of vehicle trips that individuals take. Second, the buildings analysis focuses on building electrification and shows that replacing end-of-life fossil fuel heating systems with electrified systems is a near-term priority that will lead to significant emissions and air pollution reductions. Third, the land use and natural climate solutions analysis shows that the San Diego region can effectively and inexpensively sequester and store carbon dioxide through protecting natural and working lands and avoiding land use change. And finally, underpinning broader decarbonization is expanding the generation and storage of electricity from renewable resources. The analysis considered where renewable energy resources could be sited in order to fulfill different policy goals and to provide sufficient electricity to existing and planned infrastructure, including homes, businesses, public transit, electric vehicles, and industry. I will discuss a few high-level key takeaways from this analysis in the next few slides. So the analysis began with an assessment of the techno-economic potential of different renewable energy resources. A map of techno-economic potential shows the areas that have the physical characteristics and minimum economic viability to produce renewable energy. This map shows the total regional techno-economic potential of utility-scale solar energy in the San Diego region, which is outlined by the county boundary in black. The colors show the levelized cost of energy, or LCOE, of different potential project areas. The LCOE represents the cost of wholesale energy production and is measured in units of cost per megawatt hour of energy produced, and includes capital and interconnection costs for developing the project. Yellow areas have the lowest LCOE for the project, and dark purple areas have the highest LCOE. This metric allows for a comparison of the relative costs of building energy projects per energy output. This initial analysis of techno-economic potential is important because it can highlight some critical facts about the region being analyzed. This map shows the onshore wind techno-economic potential for the San Diego region and shows that there's much less regional ability to utilize utility scale onshore wind than utility scale solar. By creating these baseline assessments of where renewable energy projects can be located to harness renewable energy, decision makers can be better informed about the relative future energy production and project development capability and costs of various sites. Additional analyses can expand the resources being analyzed to create a set of more location-specific outputs. For the San Diego region, which has significant urban and suburban development, additional renewable energy resources were considered that could reduce the overall land use footprint of renewable energy generation. This map shows additional potential resources for the region. So first, the analysis considered brownfield solar and wind, shown as red and blue dots respectively, where brownfield development occurs on contaminated or condemned land. Second is rooftop solar, where the potential for rooftop development is shown by the total building footprint in black. Third, geothermal energy, shown as green circles, is a renewable energy baseload resource. Fourth, wave energy potential, shown here as a green line in the ocean that demarcates a water depth of 200 meters, is technically possible off the coast. And finally, offshore wind, shown by its levelized cost of energy, where lighter colors have higher costs, is also technically possible off the coast. This analysis also considered where energy storage projects could be located. In addition to creating enough energy to meet demand and to expand electricity access, planners and decision makers need to also plan to store excess intermittent energy for later use. For example, excess solar energy can be captured and stored in the middle of the day when energy demand is relatively lower and when solar energy production tends to be high. This stored energy can then be used later in the day, for instance, at night when the sun has stopped shining, while simultaneous total energy demand rises as people turn on lights, cook food, and engage in other activities. Though this analysis did not explicitly consider the energy systems engineering question of modeling peak demand, the analysis nevertheless showed where potential energy storage systems can be cited to provide enhanced system reliability. Additional analyses on system reliability can and should complement geospatial analyses. This map shows the San Diego region's potential battery storage locations as gray circles, where the size of the circle shows the storage potential in megawatts, and pumped storage hydropower, which is a long duration energy storage option, as a red circle. So finally, this analysis demonstrates that renewable energy siting can prioritize different policy goals, outcomes, and/or costs. This sort of scenario analysis is useful for visualizing the trade-offs of renewable energy production. As an example, the RDF analysis included scenarios where some lands were excluded from renewable energy siting and demonstrated the regional energy potential when those lands were not developed. This map shows utility scale solar and onshore wind development potential in the San Diego region when lands that were categorized as being of high conservation value were excluded. The San Diego region is considered a biodiversity hotspot and has numerous threatened and endangered species. So showing a scenario that avoids lands that support biodiversity and protected species is important for understanding the trade-offs of utility scale energy. In this map, yellow areas have the lowest project costs and purple areas have the highest project costs. This scenario ultimately does not produce enough energy to meet regional demand, so additional resources like rooftop solar or geothermal energy would be necessary under these siting constraints. Renewable energy infrastructure development is important for reducing greenhouse gas emissions and local air pollution, as well as building out the grid to increase and expand energy access in a way that reduces reliance on fossil fuels. Additionally, creating geospatially explicit analyses of a region's techno-economic potential can be an important first step to understanding the feasibility, relative costs, and trade-offs of investing in different renewable energy projects. Beyond the energy and land use modeling within the technical report, a team from the University of San Diego's Energy Policy Initiative Center created a local policy analysis. It analyzed existing policies, actions, and plans related to emissions and climate, while it simultaneously identified gaps between existing and proposed local policies and local goals, like equitably addressing climate change. This analysis is central to understanding the political feasibility of the technical information provided elsewhere in the report, and it sets the groundwork for the implementation pathways and for understanding where there are gaps in the current policy landscape. Analyses like this will be critical for regional efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, expand electricity access, and create opportunities for employment in response to local needs and constraints. As an example from the RDF, the local policy analysis found that first, the current total regional climate commitments fall short of a state-mandated net zero emissions goal by mid-century. This is an important finding because it's the first study to quantify the emissions reductions associated with local commitments, and it's also the first study to consider the region as a whole. Second, the analysis included a study of local jurisdictions' legal authority and found that legal authority to act was not generally a barrier to action. This is an important component of a local policy analysis because it establishes the legal boundaries for climate action, energy expansion, and more. Third, the analysis included examples from the region and from around California to highlight policies that could be applicable to jurisdictions seeking to enact their own policies. This contribution is important because concrete examples can reduce some of the difficulties and/or uncertainties associated with creating and establishing a policy. Finally, the analysis identified numerous opportunities where regional collaboration can help to facilitate local action. This is fundamental because collaborative regional action can produce larger emissions reductions than the sum of the jurisdiction's individual actions. Together, these findings demonstrate that a local policy analysis can facilitate more effective and more robust policy action that can apply the lessons learned from the technical analyses. In addition to conducting analyses on the technical feasibility, the local policy opportunities, and the community needs, it is important to analyze the changes to the local workforce that will occur and to create plans to ensure that the workforce benefits from investments in renewable energy access and other decarbonization goals. Policies can be designed to ensure that new jobs are high-road jobs. Generally, these are jobs with high job quality characteristics, like family supporting wages and benefits, high standards for health and safety, long-term career pathways, and worker protections. Additionally, high-road jobs have high job access characteristics, like access to good jobs for local workers and training to support advancement. In supporting the workforce while developing renewable energy and broader decarbonization, more people can benefit from climate and energy access investments. On a closing note, the RDF and the lessons learned so far in the San Diego region show that regional collaboration is essential for the development of implementation pathways and for collectively addressing a problem that no one city or jurisdiction can solve independently. For regions that are analyzing how to expand electricity access and to do so in a way that simultaneously expands renewable energy, it's important to work collaboratively because renewable energy sources may be optimally located far from areas that are selected for electricity expansion. This will have impacts on land use and may cross multiple jurisdictions, which will require cooperation and collaboration. Additionally, as other sectors electrify, like transportation and systems for cooking or heating in buildings, then regional collaboration can facilitate efficient electrification and can integrate land use considerations through things like interjurisdictional planning. Finally, a lesson learned from the RDF and the San Diego region is that equity should be central to all decarbonization and climate initiatives. Focusing on a regional approach to social equity can ensure that all communities are able to engage in and benefit from public and private investments to address energy access, renewable energy development, and decarbonization. This concludes our presentation. We thank you for listening, and Elena, Murtaza, and I are happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
I'm going to and say a couple things, one of which is thank you. This was a incredibly informative, inspiring talk and presentation by all of you. I am incredibly moved. You were right, Elena. This was incredibly useful. What you've presented is not just merely the results of all this work in the San Diego region, but I see it as a template for every region, and not just Chicago, New York, and Miami, et cetera, but the rest of the world, with modifications. If you're an inland city, you're not going to count wave and offshore wind and stuff. But have you thought of, or have you put together not just the results of your study, but a manual on how you can do it if you're in Chicago or Nairobi or wherever? Because if you haven't, I would urge you. And that we see it, I see it as a model for what every other region on this planet ought to be doing. And there are pieces of it, perhaps major chunks of it, that in terms of the procedure, the methodology, that ought to be applied to Africa and getting electricity to the 600 million people there without electricity, who haven't yet switched on a light switch. So one, thank you for all of that. And I'd be interested to know, I've got a few questions myself. The way we have done the questions for all the other speakers is they ask them in the chat box, and then I'll go through that and weed out redundant ones or something and ask them. But my question that I've already asked is, do you have a manual, on what you did in the San Diego region?
Professor Gable, I am over here cracking up, and I swear, Elise and Murtaza, I did not seed this question. We do actually. It's actually already drafted. It's written. It's going to be available in August. We literally pulled out the methodology, all of the baseline assumptions, and what do you need to get started. We even have a checklist of how to get started, how to develop the project team, what kind of capacity do you need, what kind of tools were used, a variety of resources of open source tools that could be adapted to different contexts. It's all in there. So thank you for that perfect segue for that. So I would be happy to make sure to share that with you all.
Yeah, if you could share, you said it'll be available in August. If there's a draft or an outline even you could share earlier than that, that would be great. We have your other report, the big one. We have been collecting reports. We put them up on a Google Drive, and all the participants have access to that. So I will remind them of that in my next email to everybody, just where it is and how to get their hands on it. But a manual would be delightful.
Fantastic. Yeah, we do have a draft, and I'm happy to share it with you. I wanted to, though, if I can, and then I'll pass it over to my colleagues if they want to address any of the questions that are popping up in the chat. But the question from Zula about how to implement this with local communities with limited resources. So I think that honestly, one of the really key ingredients of all of this was the University of California, San Diego. Because it's a university, and because so much of their research is a part of that, the key part of their work, right? I don't think if we didn't have the scoping capacity at the university to take the time to look at the national study, understand there was a potential need, and then work really closely, obviously, with the county to design this thing. So I would say if you're working in a limited resource environment, starting with finding an academic institution or university that could potentially be a core partner in this to try to at least start the brainstorming, it would be my number one recommendation.
Do any of your colleagues have anything to say? I can start going through these questions if you don't, but again, thank you for your fantastic work and your wonderful presentation. It kept me on the edge of my seat, so thank you. There is a question from Lewis Conway, is developing world Africa component to the San Diego's regional approach, either shadowing or reflecting or funding some of the lessons being learned in San Diego. Not quite sure what that means, but is there, I mean, that's what you all are, Sustainable Development Solutions Network, I sort of see as part of the answer to that. That's one of the things you're doing with your network. But if you've got a better answer, which I suspect you do to that, please chime in here. And
Yeah.
if you go ahead.
I read that as maybe asking about the sharing the border with Mexico potentially, or the binational aspect there is how I've read that. But yeah, I mean, our DDP, our model is always to facilitate sharing, and actually the work you're going to hear about next by Perrine on the roadmap. So that they're we work really closely with Columbia, and we're part of them as well. So as far as like network sharing and knowledge sharing and helping facilitate exercises like the one that you're going to see later, is definitely part of what we do.
All right, so I mean, that's one of the big challenges in Africa. I mean, San Diego has to deal with Mexico. You don't have to worry about Canada, or Brazil, but in Africa, you've got 50 some countries all gathered together. So the regional cooperation. I mean, there are regional, obviously, groups there, but all right. So Zula's question was answered. Could you develop a little bit more on wave energy? Is it similar to geothermal? That is a question. If you're dealing with policy and programs and that may or may not be out of your expertise area, but if it is, just say so, and we'll move on to the next question.
I
Go ahead.
can briefly answer it. This is a pilot with Scripps Institute off of the shore of San Diego. So it is not yet a scalable technology. They're barely powering a little bit off of University of California. So it is still in development, this technology.
And Gurinder, I can talk to you about, there's been a lot of work down at the University of Delaware. There's like US has a bunch of agriculture schools. Delaware's got an ocean school. And one of the things they've been working on is low cost wave energy, not monstrous installations that are for megawatt installations, but small scale ones that a community could use. But that's off topic here. This one from Barry, I've read a few reports and watched a few TED Talks where they claim that current nuclear power is cleaner, cheaper, less evasive to a landscape and produces more energy than wind or solar. What's your rebuttal to that? I mean, I certainly have my fairly strong opinions about that, but you're the speakers here. So I would like to hear if you've got any, because you have or had some nuclear plants in your neck of the woods. So how do you?
Yeah. Maybe I'll take that from the national perspective. So I'm not quite sure which ones you're talking about, because I have also seen, so basically traditional nuclear is super expensive, and that's basically the limiting factor for its continued use. And in our national study, we do retire it, I think, in like the 2040s at its natural retirement rate. And it's just because of a cost factor there. Although nuclear is a very contentious, there's different like cultural aspects as far as comfort with it. But I personally, and I can say this, fourth generation nuclear and modular reactors gets me very excited. I think there's a big potential in specific regions and specific contexts where it might be needed. I can't say that is the case for San Diego County, but just generally. But Murtaza, any thoughts there?
Well, at this, the energy modeling did not include the nuclear component because we do not have a current source. We did used to have a nuclear plant here at San Onofre, which is, the plant was located right on the ocean, and there are some safety concerns about it. So it is now going through a decommissioning process, and they're trying to figure out what to do with the radioactive material at this point.
So I have a question that gets at you all and with the body of work you've done as a template for other work in other regions. The work that we're going to be doing here is going to be looking at sub-Saharan Africa, and that is a very large region, considerably bigger than San Diego. But is there any reason, or what are the reasons are there any weaknesses in using your body of work? For instance, the slide, I think it was something about transforming, national to local, as a template. Where might it not be appropriate, or where might the weaknesses or problems arise in picking that up? San Diego is significantly different than sub-Saharan Africa, undoubtedly similarities, but clearly and obviously different. So where might it, what cautionary tales might you see or tell us about not using it, or using it, period, but with some cautionary places? Are there any?
If you want me to jump in here, Elena, I think the model we're talking about is how do we collaborate across the public and private sectors and between agencies. That also includes some of the partners that have not been at the table so far. For example, tribes, environmental justice communities, and those that are underserved, that are oftentimes not brought to the table. So the collaborative approach is really focused on how do we get that collaboration to then generate implementation ideas. When the implementation ideas come out of it, because the framework is already a ready-made, if you will, funding pitch for investors, for other state and federal agencies, they see this is a very competitive application because of the underlying base of analysis and the robustness that thought and participation that went into creating the framework. So we hope that it'll attract this kind of investment. There's already tables that are happening. We don't need to be part of every single table when investors come in and make decisions, but they can use this analysis for those investment opportunities and grant applications.
So one of your slides had in it, early on about one of the key things was it was sort of benchmarks for federal government. One of them was, we wanted the solar and wind increase 3.5 times. And then there was a list of additional things. And it struck me that that was a wonderful, understandable summary. It wasn't filled with technical jargon. It was just, boom, here it is. And, the footnotes might have the rest of it, but it looked like that struck me as a template for, if Africa is to get 600 million people online, the electricity needed for them in clean, renewable ways, it might not be 3.5 times, it might be, 30 times, whatever it is, but that struck me as a useful template or guidepost. And I'd like to know if that, you see any problem with that, if you using it in that creative way.
Please.
But
Sorry.
yeah. Well, I'll say those results are based on a least cost model. So, right, if we are trying to reach net zero by mid-century, it's a backcasting exercise. So what do we need to do at this point, at this point, at this point? And so those are the 2030 benchmarks in a least cost scenario. I would say part of the weakness of that national study is we didn't talk about conservation of lands, and we didn't talk about the valuation of ecosystem services or anything, those other parts. It was kind of just a basic infrastructure expansion study. And then we kind of built on it from there. So if we want to get to net zero as fast and as cheap as possible, we need that 3.5. But there are other elements that we might need to consider along the way. And that's exactly where the more subnational and regional work comes in, because they can contextualize those goals and be like, okay, well, is it really 3.5, or could we subsidize this with some efficiency parameters, really implement, do some modal shifts for our transport, and instead only need to build out X amount, you know? So yeah, I don't know if that answered your question. Sorry, Murtaza, go ahead.
No, it does answer my question. It also brings up one additional thing, and then we want to go back to our chat list if we've got additional questions here. We've got, actually, we only have a few more minutes, but let me, the question that comes up for me has to do with the current, your all work is based on the current economic system. You're not including into the system, for instance, the services we receive from the ecosystem and their value, because they don't seem to have much value, if any, in the current economic system. If one were to include those things in the economic system, economic accounting system, it would be a no-brainer. What you're talking about and proposing would be implemented almost overnight, because the case for the economic case would be so compelling that there really isn't any other alternatives, but in my opinion, than doing the right thing following what it is you folks have put out there as here's the pathway forward. And I'm assuming that that's correct, my assumption about you leaving out of the study things like the services that we get from Mother Nature.
Well, it just changes the formula. When you start incorporating those as part of the cost and benefits, things that might be really more expensive that are not included, like the expansion of a national high-speed rail system, right? We're talking about modal shifts of our electric vehicle because they're cost effective, it's affordable, it's something that we can see in our sites. If you start talking about, if you start changing the balancing of the equation, some of these other more expensive, more innovative solutions start becoming more viable in that reality.
Right, okay. Let me see if there's any other questions other than thank you to you all. It is 11 o'clock, and as much as I would love to go on listening to you and probing some more questions, we made an agreement with you all that you were here from 10 to 11, and I need to honor that and move on to the next set of activities. So thank you again. Actually, I have one more request. Is it possible for you to share your slideshow? Just because there's a ton of stuff in there that went by fairly quickly, and it would be nice to use it as we go forward. You know, what did they do in San Diego? Will it apply to sub-Saharan Africa? Anyhow, it could be valuable, and if you can, please send me a link or something to it, and we'll share it. Now back to where I was before. Thank you. Thank you all three for this excellent, inspiring, informative presentation. I really, really appreciate it. We all really, really appreciate it. So thank you.
Thank you so much.